Warlocks! There's so much to say that I will spend this entire video just talking about Pacts and Eldritch Invocations. If you want, you can watch my previous video for more insight into Warlocks, but I think you should be fine just watching this. Welcome to Pact Tactics. Eldritch Invocations are something Warlocks first get access to at level 2. They are additional magical abilities. You start off by choosing 2 and eventually get access to a total of 8. Some can be picked whenever, but others have some requirements that you need to fulfill. From level 2 and onwards, you get to swap one of your invocations with licit ones every time you level up, similar to some spellcasters work in regards to their spells. By now, there are around 54 options you get to choose from. However, the two most common options are Repelling Blast and Agonizing Blast, and I would recommend them wholeheartedly. Both of them require you to have Eldritch Blast, which is Warlock's bread and butter. The former makes it into a potent tool for setting up teamwork with the rest of your party. For example, pushing them through spike growth. That's a classic. The latter makes the cantrip pack an actual punch, letting you do quite decent damage at will. I would almost always suggest you pick these two. If not early on, then sure, do it later on. However, for others, you first need to have chosen a specific pact boon. You might be scratching your head wondering, well, what is that? Well, it's just another way for Warlocks to stand apart from one another. At level 3, you get a gift from their patron. Usually, you get to pick from 3 choices, namely Pact of the Blade, Pact of the Chain, and Pact of the Tome. If you have Tashes available to you, then you also have Pact of the Talisman as well. So 4 options, basically. Let's do a quick intermezzo and talk about these a bit more. Speaking of Tashes, while you're usually stuck with your Pact for life and beyond, this book includes an optional rule, Eldritch Versatility, that allows you to swap your Pact boon whenever you reach a level in your class, where you get an ASI. So what's the best choice? Well, to be honest, you might not believe this. I actually think pact boons are quite balanced for the most part. They all have very valid situations to be picked in, which is a good thing. This is not to say that they will always work for any build, but they all have their uses. Let me start with Pact of the Blade. By itself, it allows you to create a melee weapon that you become proficient in. And it also slices through creatures with resistance and immunity to non-magical damage, no problem. You can also turn magic weapons into your pact weapon, though not artifacts or sentient weapons. While it's not a big deal most of the time, did you know this includes a really funny and interesting interaction with anti-magic fields? Let me quote, "You are proficient with it while you wield it. The weapon counts as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage." It isn't technically magical because of this. It just ignores resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks. So you can still damage liches in an anti-magic field. Monk's unarmed strikes have a similar quirk. Anyways, improved pact weapon, the Eldritch Invocation, allows us to create ranged pact weapons with our pact boon as well. This removes any reason for Pact of the Blade Warlocks to go into melee. This is not to say I would recommend another pact boon if you want to go into melee. I'm just saying that Pact of the Blade Warlock does not need to go into melee. This is a worthwhile pickup if you haven't gotten a ranged magic weapon yet. Though for another piece of trivia, with some teamwork you can actually ensure that you can use a weapon like a hand crossbow as part of a pact weapon even without the good grace of your DM. I think many people will squint at this and not allow it, but at that point, bribe your DM with pizza instead and hope for magic items in the wild. Pizza! One of the ways to do this is one of your mates casts magic weapon or elemental weapon on your hand crossbow. It is now a magical weapon. You then immediately start your ritual to transform a magical weapon into your pact weapon. If you believe there has to be time between the spell and the ritual, as well as believing that it needs to be magical the whole way through, have someone cast the spell again somewhere during the process. Moving on, another powerful invocation is Thirsting Blade, which is basically extra attack for Warlocks. something which is quite important if you want to do good damage. Finally, speaking of damage, you might like Eldritch Smite, which adds good Nova. It's something Flagship Ranger picks up as well. It's a build, link in the description. All in all, this pack boon is a good option if you like your damage to go brrrr. It combines well with Devil's Sight, which allows you to see through darkness spell no problem. So with a power attack feat like Sharpshooter or Great Weapon Master, made up for by the advantage of seeing enemies that cannot see you, and a bonus action attack feat like Crossbow Expert and Polar Master, you'll be doing a ton of damage. You might want to consider swapping out at least one of the Eldritch Blast invocations, because weapons will be your main damage option. Have you ever found yourself lost in the mists of Barovia, wondering how you'll ever keep track of all the NPCs and plot threads? Well, I've got a solution for you. This video is sponsored by World Anvil, the tool you need to conquer even the most challenging of campaigns. It's perfect for organizing all of your campaign notes, from character sheets to maps to even homebrew rules. Keeping track of the player's progress and NPCs moving around the world is easy with this. I always lose my yellow sticky notes, but I never lose my World Anvil notes. Guys, the interface is so easy that even a kobold like Kobold can use it. Correct, and you can also get this handy tool too. Use the code PACK at the checkout and you'll get a 40% off any yearly subscription. Kobold, when are you going to help me build Gatorland? Later, alligator. Back to the video. Next is Pact of the Tome. This pack boon gives you an edgy book. You also get to pick 3 additional cantrips. Some solid contenders here are Guidance, Thorn Whip, Control Flames, and Shape Water. But of course, you could use this to fill up your repertoire with more Warlock spells like Booming Blade, Magic Stone, and Toll the Dead. The real kicker of Pact of the Tome is that you get access to a fantastic invocation, Book of Ancient Secrets. You basically get the ritual casting of a wizard. From the start, you get to choose 2 first level ritual spells from any class. I'd recommend Find Familiar and maybe something like Detect Magic or Unseen Servant. You could get Unseen Servant by learning it normally, scribing it into a scroll and then copying it into the Book of Shadows. After which you swap out the spell on a level up. After the initial point you pick up this invocation, you can transcribe spells into your book for some costs. But using the strategy described before, this pact boon and invocation combination can be quite incredible for certain subclasses, like the Undead Warlock. Undead Warlock gets access to Phantom Steed. Though even outside of that, if your DM tends to hand out scrolls, this choice can still be really good. Alternatively, if you already have a wizard in your party, you can ask to copy their homework to get access to higher level ritual spells, and doubling up on awesome ones like Phantom Steed and so on. If you really like rituals, this might be one of the best options. Because unlike a wizard, you can use the rituals of any class in the game. If you want to learn more about scrolls, check out my video about them. Now for Pact of the Talisman. By default, this gives you a talisman of which the wearer becomes better at certain ability checks a few times per day. Anyone can wear this. You can hand it to your friend, you can wear it yourself, and blah blah blah. Keep in mind that you can only use the talisman when you fail a roll. So this does not work on something like Initiative. It does, however, work on Counterspell and Dispel Magic, as those are ability checks. Usually you'd pick this boon for Rebuke of the Talisman. This allows you to push enemies 10 feet away from the wearer when they get attacked. It also deals psychic damage to the attacker equal to your proficiency bonus. All of this is a reaction to use. And yes, ranged attacks can trigger this. This is a fantastic option in teams where you make use out of builds that bully enemies by moving them, slowing them, and so on. You yourself can help with Repelling Blast and Lance of Lethargy, which slows down enemies. This combination is a strong contender for Fathomless Warlocks because of their Tentacles of the Deep feature, or Genie Dao Warlocks. I've already made videos about both of these subclasses. They're fantastic. Now, obviously, this combo becomes a lot weaker if people tend to run into melee and don't use the space it generates. blasts. But that's not to say that it's always a bad choice. I'd say it's the opposite. Another invocation, Bond of the Talisman, adds some nice out-of-combat utility, but it can also be used in combat if need be. Whereas Protection of the Talisman is mostly aimed at combat and protects its wearer when rolling saving throws. But Kobold! Why did you skip Pact of the Chain? I was getting to it. This Pact boon gives you not just Find Familiar, but also additional creature options for the spell. If you want a deep dive about which options are the best, check out Tabletop Build's article. But generally, you should pick one of the new options. And for some of these options, you can milk them for their poison. I've already made a video about it with pseudo dragons, but I'm gonna make another poison video eventually. Poison milking can contribute quite a lot to your party if the game has a few days of downtime, and treasure amounts remotely close to the DMG lists. It's really good even without picking specific invocations to make it work. Therefore, this pack boon is usually seen as the one you should go for if you have all your invocations planned out, but have no space for pact boon specific ones, as it's the best when you don't have any invocations left for it. Though if you do want to invest, some other interesting invocations here are Voice of the Chainmaster, as it can basically grant you blind sight, and it's really good for scouting and even role-playing. I think this invocation is super fun. My second Warlock picked this. Or alternatively, Investment of the Chainmaster, which increases the saving throw DC of your familiar, and allows it to make attacks. So stack up on magic stones and let them go wild. Sprite is especially interesting with its short bow that poisons. I think that's basically all I wanted to say about pact boons, and I've talked a bit about some Eldritch invocations too. What else is there to say? Well, I talked about this before. You don't get infinite invocations, so sometimes you need to make choices. In my last Warlock guide, I talked about how Eldritch Mind really helps the class by a ton, as it's a good form of concentration protection. So do you pick this at level 2 instead of Repelling Blast or Agonizing Blast, or do you pick up Concentration Protection some other way? If you play a build that doesn't need an invocation at level 5, I would say you could just pick this instead of Repelling Blast, which makes you slightly worse off until level 5. If you are playing a build that wants an additional invocation at level 5, I'd actually say that instead of going Warforged for that extra AC and picking up Eldritch Mind, you might want to consider concentration protection through a level 1 feat. This basically means you lose out on 1 AC, but it's instead gaining Repelling Blast. I believe it's worth it if you have a party that can cover your defensive weaknesses, where you can make up for it with offensive efficiency through Repelling Blast. But if you just play with casual players or a random table, the +1 AC will likely be necessary if you want to be sturdy. Kobold! What other invocations are good? I have way more spots! I've mentioned Repelling and Agonizing Blast, Lance of Lethargy, Devil's Sight, and all the pact boons that I believe are worthwhile. Grasp of Hadar is interesting for the same reason as Repelling Blast and Lance of Lethargy. I also believe I mentioned Toma Levistus last video for its fantastic ability to keep you from dying. Usually at later levels, Warlocks get some space to get utility options, like Shroud of Shadow, which is nice for familiar scouting. And it's also nice to start combat while invisible. Visions of Distant Realms can also be used for scouting, or Whispers of the Grave for clues for the same purpose. And lastly, some options that aren't amazing for Warlocks, but are good for dips or through the Eldritch Adept feat are Armor of Shadows for at-will mage armor for Abjuration Wizards, check out my video, and Misty Visions for at-will Silent Image for Illusion Wizards. We've basically covered everything now. End of video. Remember to check out World Anvil. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.